Are you ready, sir?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Doesn't look like my connection is good. But anyway, we do have you on live stream on YouTube, yes?
Should be, yes, live streaming as we go.
So I can let go of this. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear colleagues, and everyone joining us from various parts of the world for this joint press briefing. My name is Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. I am a medical doctor in clinical practice, and I welcome this opportunity to be here within my colleagues in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the highest attainment of physical and mental health. As I presented my 5th thematic report to the Human Rights Council, which focuses on health and care workers as defenders of the right to health, this briefing today brings into focus an important element, the fact that many of us are sick from genocide. We bring to voice to healthcare workers grappling with a crisis that is both clinical, moral, and political. It is a very heavy toll, having to be trained to save lives while forced to witness hospitals being reduced to rubble, medical staff targeted, and communities devastated by starvation, disease, and displacement. And so all of us here, and proudly saying and calling them my colleagues, we represent various medical backgrounds and hold this press briefing for one purpose, because we refuse to remain passive and silent in the face of a genocide. It's also important to remind and underscore that my role as the Special Rapporteur is guided by the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and the responsibility of all nations to uphold the inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination that enshrines for all people. I, as many of us, continue to grieve for the lives lost, for livelihoods, for a future, for community, for heritage, both cultural, political, lost due to Israel's occupation, which is illegal, and continued recalcitrant violence together with its allies. Just days into the war, I warned that Gaza's medical infrastructure was on the path of being irreparably damaged. That early warning system, which is supposed to be human rights, was ignored. And this war has been on the right to health and underlying determinants of health. The attacks on hospitals and healthcare workers are on a scale we have never seen and yet to truly quantify. With the current infrastructure damage at every level, the practice of medicine is under attack by Israel. The attacks, harassment, killings of hundreds of healthcare workers, destruction of health facilities and humanitarian organizations continue to catapult this genocide to proportions yet to be fully quantified. The Human Rights Council entrusted me with the responsibility to witness and report any violations to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And my mandate has received information regarding the genocide and multiple violations on the right to health. And I have been in communication with the government of Israel on these matters. Before concluding and handing over the floor to my colleagues, I would like to make a call for the release of all health and care workers that have been detained, harassed, tortured, and an immediate stop to the targeting and killing of health and care workers. Health and care workers are human rights defenders. We are sick from multiple and intersecting forms of violence and the coercive nature of imperialistic, capitalistic violence. The world now more than ever needs strong, decisive leadership to end all suffering. There is no place for silence in diplomacy. Silence is complacency. And an end to all forms of violence, including colonial imperialist violence, must remain the ultimate goal. And the extent to which human development, peace, and lasting security can be achieved must be understood by the extent to which human rights are protected, promoted, and fulfilled by all member states. And the right to health in this context is particularly important. We demand an immediate ceasefire. The lands are occupied and brutalized, but the mind, the heart, and soul of a people remain intrinsically free and seeking self-determination and true liberation, which will result in peace. You cannot extinguish the human desire for freedom, and it is my promise as a mandate holder on the right to health that I will continue to respond not only to reports of violations, but to do the important work of prevention using the international human rights mechanisms and the systems that have been afforded to me by the Council. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your courageous words and for speaking truth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maysa Hawash. I'm a physiotherapist, a workplace equity and inclusion expert, one of the founding leaders of Doctors Against Genocide, but most importantly, a Palestinian. Doctors Against Genocide is a coalition of healthcare workers and advocates who refuse to stay silent as the world witnesses a catastrophic assault on human life, dignity, and the very foundation of medical ethics. Today, I speak to you not only as a healthcare professional, but as a witness, as a Palestinian, and as a voice for those who have been silenced. The destruction of a people is not a spontaneous act. It is the final stages of a process that begins with words, with laws, with silence. And if medicine is to serve life, it must never again be silent. Spoken by Dr. Nidal Shpoor, one of the co-founders of Doctors Against Genocide. Today, I ask you to see genocide for what it is truly, not only as a crime for courtrooms to debate, but as a disease of humanity. It spreads like an epidemic, propagating through language, ideology, and institutional complicity. It attacks hospitals, schools, farms, and water systems. It ravages the bodies and minds of entire communities, leaving generations grappling with deep psychological scars, chronic illnesses, and broken futures. Genocide is a global health emergency of the highest order, yet it is rarely treated as the urgent public health crisis that it is. Rarely taught in medical schools, rarely met with early detection and intervention. The silence is lethal. As a Palestinian who has lived through the brutal occupation, I recognize every step used to dehumanize, displace, and destroy. The tactics we witness in Gaza today, isolation, starvation, bombings, displacement, the targeting of hospitals, and the assassination of doctors are not new. They are methods, a pathology, and we have seen them over and over again. They are the clinical signs of genocide, and I have felt their sting in my own bones. And this is why Palestinian voices must always be heard, centered and believed. When Palestinians describe the atrocities being committed against them, the world must listen, must act, and must reject silence, must reject skepticism, and must reject the complicity that allows genocide to flourish. To witness genocide and doubt the testimony of the victims is to enable its spread. The world must stand with those under threat, acknowledge their reality, and rally to protect their lives and their rights. Look at the vacant eyes of this child, says Dr. Ahmed Al-Farira, head of pediatrics at Al Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where many of the children have received treatment for malnourishment, in an interview with Doctors Against Genocide a few weeks ago. He was speaking about a 2-year-old boy, Amr, a malnutrition patient. You can see a lot of questions in his eyes. Where is my mother? Where is my father? What is the crime that I committed to deserve this punishment? Children like Amr, they cannot cry. Staff dealing with them feel so sad, and they are crying because of the sadness they feel for children like Amr. From a medical lens, genocide is not an abstract concept. It is a complex, syndromic disease. It attacks every vital system that allows a population to survive and thrive. It destroys hospitals, kills doctors, and wipes out infrastructure, water, farms, transportation. To cripple the body of a people, it inflicts acute and chronic illnesses by weaponizing starvation, disease, displacement, and terror. Its wounds are both physical and psychological, leaving deep scars that embed themselves across generations. This disease, though, doesn't just affect its victims. It affects those of us who witness it as well. Around the world, countless healthcare workers now describe themselves as sick from genocide, a profound moral and psychological injury. It is the toll of knowing, seeing, and being trained to heal, yet being forced to watch the systemic dismantling of life itself. It is the headaches, the insomnia, the panic attacks, the grief, the burning anger, and overwhelming sense of heartbreak that arises when silence and complicity allow atrocities to continue before our eyes. It is the trauma of bearing witness to a disease that we have the knowledge and tools to heal and prevent, if only the world would listen and act. And so we must break the silence. We must reject the false separation between medical ethics and global events. The same way we alert authorities when a child is abused, we must sound the alarm when an entire population is at risk of annihilation. Genocide is not just a crime. It is a medical emergency, a disease that demands prevention as urgently as any pandemic. That is why we call for an independent global medical body empowered to monitor warning signs and diagnose genocide as a medical condition long before it peaks, mobilize humanitarian resources and medical interventions, hold perpetrators accountable, especially those attacking the infrastructure of life and health, push for international law that acts on risk, not only proof after death. Train every doctor, nurse, therapist, and public health worker to recognize genocide for what it is and to raise the alarm. This is our oath. Where hatred takes root, we will name it. Where silence protects the powerful, we will speak. Where life is threatened, we will intervene, not after, but before. To heal is to prevent is to protect. And to protect is the heart of medicine. Recognizing genocide as a disease is the first step to ending it before it ends more lives. And to end it, we must listen to those it attacks. We must stand with the people who bear its wounds. We must believe their testimony, and we must center their voices. We must act, and we must act now. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Okay for me to. Thank you again, folks, for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Dr. Tlaling, for the leadership that you've shown in bringing this together. We're here today to reflect on the foundational argument that Dr. Mofokeng has put forward in the submission to the Human Rights Council, which is that healthcare workers are human rights defenders the world over. And this is really a profound call to action, not only to us as healthcare workers, but to the medical and public health establishments that trained us, that shaped us, and that have given us a way of seeing and understanding the world that we move through. Many years ago, Nancy Krieger offered an incredibly incisive critique of public health, where she described the discipline as value-free. And this, of course, is not an accident. This is the sort of manufactured depoliticization of a discipline that, by virtue of its values and principles, should have teeth, and should indeed, of course, be a discipline that foregrounds the pursuit of justice and the defense of human rights. It's critically important that we interrogate how this ever came to pass. And of course, the situation as we now see it in Gaza and throughout occupied Palestine, the silence of international medical and public health institutions, their belated and piecemeal acknowledgement that something is happening in Palestine, often without naming the perpetrator or naming fully what indeed is happening in Palestine, is all a product of this sort of manufactured depoliticization of our disciplines. I'm going to share a few reflections, really just a reiteration of the comments that I made during our briefing a short while ago. I worked in Gaza for 2.5 months during this accelerated phase of Israel's long-standing genocide against the Palestinian people. And as a healthcare worker, I and my colleagues who've been trained to diagnose and treat pathology. At the same time, we're also trained to identify the things that make us sick. Now, in contemporary Western articulations of public health, we often think about the immediate social determinants of health. For example, that poor housing leads to respiratory illnesses and so on. But rarely are we pressed to interrogate the root causes of the root causes. Only recently, in academic discourse, have Palestinian scholars been at the forefront of encouraging us to appreciate that settler colonialism is a determinant of health. Capitalism, of course, is a determinant of health. Occupation and apartheid, too. It's in situations of extreme violence and genocide, armed conflict and war, that the most fundamental right to life is violated. In the case of genocide, intentionally violated. Under these conditions, clinical diagnosis and medical treatment can only go so far, particularly as entire populations are subjected to atrocity crimes and repeated violations of their most basic human rights. In Gaza, more than in any other context I've worked anywhere else in the world, healthcare workers, almost every healthcare worker I've worked with has recognized that they have a dual obligation, both to provide medical care, but to bear witness and to speak out. For me, the thing that I've taken from Dr. Klaling's report and the substance of the submissions that were fed into the reports is the question of what is healthcare? What is left of healthcare if we refuse to recognize the importance of a defense of the right to health? And of course, this demands that in turn we challenge the limitations that have the imposed limitations attached to current and contemporary examples of health practice, particularly in situations of armed conflict. And by this, I mean the dominant forms of humanitarian medicine and humanitarian public health. Some have called this challenge to dominant and hegemonic forms solidarity medicine. Others have called it liberation medicine. And there's a vibrant resurgence now of long traditions of liberation that far predated all of us in the room today, that have been advanced by prominent figures who recognize that medicine is political and politics is medicine. Che Guevara, George Habash, Frantz Fanon, and many others, in whose lineage we are really privileged to follow. I want to quickly acknowledge the submission that we made to Dr. Claleng's report, which was a detailed overview compiled by 18 health justice advocates and human rights defenders, many of whom themselves have been targeted, vilified, doxxed, and in some cases fired or suspended from their work for taking up the mantle and for recognizing that indeed as healthcare workers, we have to be advocates and we must advocate, particularly in the context of Israel's genocide in Gaza. In the report, we detail what Ghassan Abu-Sitta has called the genocide enablement apparatus. And this phrase really refers to the very basic understanding that genocide doesn't simply occur when a group of people decide to enact eliminatory violence against another group of people. It also occurs when institutions, systems, and processes that are meant to protect us and speak up in defense of human rights engage in active silencing and passive silence. This creates the space for genocidal intent, gross impunity, and moral decay to fester. In our report and in much of the work that Dr. Claleng and many other health justice advocates the world over have done, we've exposed these systems in order to fight back. Also in order, of course, to lay the groundwork for accountability, justice, and the reclamation of the values and principles that we're led to believe should underpin medical and public health practice. In Gaza, as Israel's violence against the Palestinian people continues, more than 1,600 Palestinian healthcare workers have been killed. Many more have been injured and hundreds have been illegally detained. Many remain in detention in Israeli detention camps. This has left far fewer people to provide care, to directly provide care inside Gaza. At the same time, institutions and predominantly Western institutions have fired healthcare workers that have condemned the bombing of hospitals and have vilified and doxxed those who have fully embraced their role as advocates for accountability, justice, and peace. This has left far fewer people to speak up. This is not just an obstacle to the fulfillment of our shared moral obligations, but it is a profound violation of the foundations of our profession. As such, we're here today collectively to say that we refuse to be co-opted as agents of violence by these systems, structures, and institutions that have shaped us. We will not sit quietly, nor will we make house within these violent and dystopian systems. It is imperative that we think and act beyond the limited possibilities put forward by these existing systems and structures. And to this end, we must embrace the principles of the well-established abolitionist tradition and imagine boldly and enact courageously. We know that healthcare workers have the potential to be powerful advocates, and this is, of course, the reason that healthcare workers have been so targeted. In Gaza, healthcare workers act to save lives, and this, in the context of genocide, is an act of counter-genocidal resistance. At the same time, those who witness are targeted, injured, and killed precisely because genocidaires seek to obscure and obfuscate the full depths of their violence. Finally, I encourage all healthcare workers worldwide really to draw hope and inspiration from Dr. Mofokeng's report, to continue to organize and to mobilize together, and to speak up courageously and consistently in the face of growing injustice the world over. Thank you, Dr. Mofokeng.
It's an honor to be with other like-minded colleagues, courageous colleagues with strong moral principles. But with that said, as I mentioned earlier in our side event, I wish I didn't have to be here. I wish I didn't have to continue to talk about ending famine and stopping the genocide, but here we are. My name is Dr. Yipeng Ji, and I'm a family doctor, also trained in public health. And I'm based on the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, also known as Ottawa, Canada, or the nation's capital. I have studied the impacts of settler colonialism as a structure and process that affects Indigenous peoples' health in the settler colonial state of Canada, as well as Zionist settler colonialism and the ongoing Nakba as a structure and process that affects Palestinian health in occupied Palestine. I was in Gaza last year as a medical volunteer in primary care clinics in central Rafah, and I witnessed with my own eyes the impacts of forced starvation on the children I cared for. I remember caring for young pediatric patients who were no longer walking due to severe malnutrition, and children that should have been walking based off of their developmental milestones, like at age 12 or 14 months of age, but were not walking due to severe malnutrition. I remember the World Health Organization recommended us to use measuring tape to track the upper arm circumference of children to determine malnutrition. But not only was this tape not available at the clinics I worked at, along with many other essential medications and supplies, but I did not need a measuring tape to tell me how some children were just skin and bones, because I was able to wrap my entire index finger and thumb around the upper arm and even the lower leg of a child that was 9 to 10 years old, being held by his mother because he could no longer walk. This is an entirely preventable famine imposed on the Palestinian people in Gaza by Israel and its allies, who allow life-saving food, water, and medical aid to be withheld to an entire population under illegal occupation and blockade since 2007, which also included the Israeli policy of limiting food to only meet the minimum amount of calories to avoid malnutrition, effectively putting the entire population on a diet. I remember meeting children who weren't my patients because they would visit the clinic to say hi to me or ask me what my name was. And I thought they were much younger than they actually were. And I realized they were children physically stunted by the impacts of a long-standing blockade on food. This colonial practice of starvation is unfortunately not new. Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, used this tactic to ethnically cleanse and displace the Indigenous population for the settlement of Canada as a settler colonial state. And in his own words, he said that the Indigenous population were kept on the, quote, verge of actual starvation, unquote. Last week, I was in Cairo, Egypt, with thousands of other ordinary people and citizens of this world who simply want to see an end to the famine and genocide in Gaza. In the past few weeks, the Freedom Flotilla, the Tunisian Samud Convoy, and the Global March to Gaza has attempted to bring aid into Gaza by sea, land, and air. These efforts were all stopped by Israel and its partners in this genocide. I remember seeing the kilometers upon kilometers of aid trucks carrying food, water, medicines, and more, all held up at the Rafah border crossing over a year ago. Nothing has changed. Israel continues to systematically withhold aid from entering Gaza to meet the needs of the population. My friend Mohammed, an ambulance driver who I met in Gaza last year, has been texting me updates during the last few days. He tells me, "We are here in Gaza. Our dreams and our children's dreams end here. Horror, fear, hunger, thirst, death. We are not okay. I'm sorry to tell you these things. Excuse me. I work hard to provide food and drink for my children and my martyred brother's children. My only brother was martyred and left behind 5 children. My extended family and I'm the sole breadwinner. There's no one but me to support them and provide for them. My children and the children of my martyred brother. I see in the Palestinian men in Gaza a reflection of my own father and other men in my life who care deeply to provide for their families despite all odds. I am heartbroken for them. Hundreds of people are being massacred every day by Israel for attempting to get small amounts of food aid set up by American mercenaries under the name of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Many are Palestinian men and boys who have survived 20 months of genocide, only to be killed trying to get food for their starving families. Over 500 people have been killed in the past month alone in this manner, attempting to get food aid for themselves and their families and their loved ones. The international community must use all necessary measures and mechanisms to end the famine and to stop the genocide being perpetrated by Israel and supported by complicit states and parties. Genocide, occupation, and apartheid do not happen within a vacuum. There is an ecosystem that sustains and maintains the status quo, that of Zionist settler colonialism and the ongoing Nakba. We must see an end to these systems and structures that have facilitated and continues to maintain a genocide being live streamed before our eyes for almost 2 years now. As for the healthcare system in Palestine, what Gaza and Palestine needs is not endless humanitarian aid or charity, but solidarity. A sovereign, self-determined, Palestinian-led healthcare system by the people, for the people. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And we do have our colleague, Lubna, who wants to make an intervention. I will make sure that the microphone is near the laptop as you speak. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much. The current genocide in the Gaza Strip and the ongoing escalation of Israeli colonial suppression in the West Bank is a symptom of states failing to hold the Israeli regime accountable for over 77 years of international crimes. The Israeli regime is built on 3 pillars: forced displacement and transfer, colonization, and apartheid, all of which are essential for the regime's existence and are all international crimes. As the Israeli regime continues to commit crime after crime, atrocity after atrocity, states continue to provide weak condemnations and fail to fulfill their obligations to stop these ongoing crimes and atrocities with sanctions. In addition to that, states are taking measures to repress, suppress, and silence the international solidarity movement. It should be noted that solidarity with Palestine in their pursuit with the Palestinian people in their pursuit of their right of self-determination and to liberate themselves from colonial suppression and domination is a duty. It's repression, the repression of the solidarity movement, its actors, and its activities, including those of the medical healthcare profession and its workers, is a violation. What is required from states is to impose sanctions, to listen to the demands, to fulfill the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and return in accordance with international law, and to provide support for the Palestinian liberation movement, and to support the acts and actions of the international solidarity movement, while fulfilling their duty to support the Palestinian people. The solidarity movement has an obligation to escalate its direct actions, to put pressure on their states to fulfill those obligations. In no time in history have states chosen to fulfill their actions on their own. It is the role of civil society and people of conscience, those who wish to see the fulfillment of all the human rights, dignity, life, to live free from discrimination and persecution, to enjoy all the provisions of a healthy mental and physical life, to escalate the direct actions to put this pressure on states for them to fulfill their obligation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor to my colleagues again, just to answer one of the questions that we have received each. So that would be a different question. You can choose which one before we then wrap up our press briefing. Who's ready to go? James? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here about the role of the global medical community, which again is really at the core of Dr. Kleinlang's report and many of the submissions that were fed into that process. What's needed, of course, is clear and unwavering opposition to injustice the world over. And that requires statements that are explicitly anti-genocide, anti-occupation, anti-apartheid, pro-justice, and pro-peace. At the same time, of course, we need concerted and coordinated opposition, particularly led by medical, public health, and allied health institutions, opposition to the international military-industrial complex, and all other political and economic systems that cause us collective harm. Really, when I look now at the institutions that I'm affiliated with and that I've historically been affiliated with, there is I can find no examples, certainly within Western institutions in the UK, I can see no clear example of a medical or public health institution that spoke out at the time that they should have spoken out, and that did so courageously and in an unwavering fashion. What we now see, if I may just reflect on this, is a certain shift in terms of, at the very least, the sort of rhetorical language that's being put forward. Some of the discourse, we see some statements made by certain prominent public health institutions with respect to the genocide in Gaza. But of course, this follows 20 months, more than 20 months of, in many cases, complete silence, and certainly a lack of tangible action. So now is the period of rhetoric, which is effectively disguising the fact that these institutions still haven't done enough and have failed to account for the fact that they didn't do enough to date. We can't possibly have a genuine and meaningful response from medical unions in the UK, or medical bodies, the Royal Colleges, prominent public health institutions, if they don't first account for why they were silent for such a long time. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, James. That was very important. The next question is, what solutions do you see at this stage to end the genocide and save the population? And for this question, I just want to mention one of the actions that Doctors Against Genocide put together, and it's a prescription that was delivered to different government bodies, mainly in Canada and the US. So we've developed a prescription to end genocide, and coming from the medical perspective that really looks at what are the clinical manifestations of this genocide. So using the medical definition of genocide to determine what are these clinical manifestations, and coming up with the diagnosis, which is the live stream genocide. But most importantly, the prescription was very simple. We need to see an end to the siege, and we need to deliver the aid unrestricted, ensure full unrestricted humanitarian access to food, water, fuel, and medical supplies to flow freely. Countries should send diplomatic convoys to help break the siege and support the safe delivery of aid. Enforce a permanent ceasefire, supports the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2728, and countries must push for an immediate and conditional ceasefire and back international civilian protection missions. Stop arming the apartheid state and sending weapons, ensuring a two-way arms embargo on Israel and all military experts and security cooperation, impose targeted sanctions on the Israeli officials and institutions complicit in war crimes and genocide. Enforce the Genocide Convention. Most countries are legally obligated, with the exception of a few, to prevent and punish genocide. Failure to act is complicity. Countries must refer perpetrators to the ICC, suspend state immunities, and prosecute. Hold dual citizens accountable. To investigate and prosecute citizens who hold dual citizenship who have served in the IOF forces for potential involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity. Enforce international law, uphold the Geneva Convention and UN CSR SCR 2286, protecting healthcare workers, prosecute attacks on civilians and infrastructure, and refer perpetrators to the International Criminal Court. Recognize a sovereign state of Palestine. Officially recognize the state of Palestine and cut all ties, financial, trade, academic, and cultural, with illegal Israeli settlements. Revoke charitable status for entities that support genocide. And this is a very important one. A lot of us are getting silenced and suppressed in our countries where we live today. So we must defend freedoms of expression. Reject anti-Palestinian racism, because it is the root cause of and one of the early signs of genocide, and bring about legislation that criminalizes any signs of anti-Palestinian racism. Protect acts of solidarity like protests, visuals, and other ways, and protect the right to speak out against Israeli apartheid and genocide. So the solutions are simple. We just need willing governments and states to implement them. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Melissa.
Another question that we received is, what can citizens do at this stage? I think what we've already heard is really important around what we're actually a part of is a broader social political movement, not only to end famine and end genocide, but for the liberation of Palestine and for the liberation of Palestinians. People in this world who are subjugated by colonial violence and domination know what they need to live a good life. They need liberation. And we need to center the voices of people experiencing that colonial domination and subjugation. And we need to also understand the context and the history and the politics in which genocide takes place. And when we can understand that, we are also better able to be in full solidarity with the Palestinian people and their inherent right to self-determination for their own peoples, for their own healthcare system, for all of their sectors that demand liberation. And so what can we do when we are bearing witness? What can we do to understand our role in this broader social political movement for the liberation of Palestine and Palestinians? Is a lot of things that have already been said. States and parties that are complicit in this genocide will not willingly end their complicity. It is up to the people to organize and to mobilize and to build the people power necessary to target the pressure points of the capitalist, colonial, imperial war machine that allows for genocide and famine to happen in Palestine. It is not happening within a vacuum. The system is not failing. The system is not broken. It is perfectly created to have the outcomes that we're seeing to this day. And when we're able to understand that, and when we're able to understand how our own governments, our own companies, our own workplaces, our own academic institutions are wholly complicit in upholding this capitalist, colonial, imperial system of domination and subjugation of Palestinians, are we closer to understanding what we are responsible for doing in terms of ending that complicity? I look towards the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement led by Palestinians in understanding what the targeted and strategic boycotts are necessary to also build the small and also major successes that are required to sustain a movement, to understand that Zionist settler colonialism and the ongoing Nakba did not happen overnight. And we have to temper our own expectations and build a sustainable movement for the liberation of Palestine, and knowing that we cannot accomplish that overnight as well. But to dismantle Zionist settler colonialism and to liberate Palestine and Palestinians, it is an ongoing struggle in using all the tactics that are necessary within our power, within our collectives, to be able to end that complicity all around the world, and especially for people living in occupied Palestine, and how do we recenter their voices, listen to their demands, and are guided by their struggle and their resistance for liberation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as I draw this joint press briefing, of course, held in Geneva, parallel to the Human Rights Council 59th session, titled Genocide as a Disease, to just say thank you to my colleagues, Maisha, Dr. Ipeng, and Dr. James, and all of you who've been joining online and who have made sure that the work continues. And I want to just take this moment to also recognize that we are responding ourselves and bearing witness to a genocide that is also making ourselves quite ill and not well. And that in how we build community, and part of why this is important today specifically, is that often we feel alone when we are in these kinds of situations, especially when the silencing is so systemic and so structural and so sustained. And so a part of what's happening today is that we are not just bringing voice or elevating voice, but we are actually taking power back as healthcare workers, as people who are working in human rights to support ultimately the end to this genocide and the illegal occupation. And of course, some of the themes covered today, include what is a genocide, what does it mean to medicine, the catastrophic collapse of humanitarian and legal systems, and the ability for transparency and therefore accountability, and of course the long-term toll of genocide on the Palestinian people in Gaza. And I think the urgent role of the global medical community cannot be overstated. It is something that is important, and we must continue to advocate for the global medical community and the governing bodies to be vocal. And unfortunately, we are here today because despite all of the international calls and demands for an immediate ceasefire, this shameful genocide has continued by Israel, supported by their allies in the USA and in European countries, with despicable acts of support through billions of dollars in aid, through weapons, political power, and cover diplomatically from accountability, to continue a destruction of a people by an illegal occupying power, to enact a genocide documented in real time by its victims. There is something also to be said to leaders within the multilateral system, the regional blocs, academia, civil society, the philanthro-capitalists, and anyone who considers themselves a leader in global health, to abandon immediately the strategy of a self-imposed passiveness and silence and act now. The intimidation and the harassment of healthcare workers and the threats they continue to face must also stop. And so too must the harassment and intimidation of UN staff and special rapporteurs and independent experts for carrying out their mission and their mandates. To all of the oppressed people everywhere in the world who are exploited, humiliated, and brutalized and colonized, I fulfill my mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health, viscerally aware and understand the compounding and the crushing weight of the systemic and structural violence that you continue to face every day. I share in your collective rage and fury with so many of you around the world. I am ashamed and deeply sorry that the world has failed you in the multiple ways that it has. And I hope through my tenure and the work entrusted upon me by the Council that one day we will share a different collective connection as humanity. A connection that isn't based on experiences of colonial imperialist trauma, what it has taken from us, what it continues to take from us, and our people and our collective future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mofokeng. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.